Okay, so welcome back to the new episode of Crosse Thinkers Podcast. And today we have Dr. Shelly Lesher from the physics department, and we will be talking about the impact of atoms. Thank you for joining us, Shelly.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to talk to you about this class.
Yeah, we have been actually talking about making this podcast since the beginning of January, but then I thought you have finished the class by then, but actually you are just starting teaching that. So I actually reserved a spot when you come back. We will talk about this class. And seems like you just came back actually after spring break. You just staying in lacrosse for the rest of the semester, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So I came back for spring break, and then Yale was closed. So I stayed in lacrosse then until the end of the class and was teaching the class online.
Okay. So can you tell me a little bit about what motivates you to teach this class? Like, why are you interested in this topic, and what kind of audience are you trying to reach?
So I'm an experimental nuclear physicist, and I started doing research in nuclear physics when I was in undergrad. And when you do nuclear physics, people are always asking you if you're making bombs or about the ethical implications of your work. And most people don't see the positive sides of nuclear physics. They don't see the medical applications. They don't see the energy side, though most people are now with climate change seeing the energy side. But nobody really sees how nuclear physics has impacted the world that we live in since the 1940s. So it's always been something that I've been interested in. And I actually started my undergrad career as a political science major. And then I had a really good physics teacher that sent me to work with someone in nuclear physics. And I just kind of kept doing research and was really interested. And so that's what got me into physics. So I've always been interested in history and political science. And so it's been something that I was interested in. And when I interviewed for the job at UWL, Dr. Suda spoke to me about this class, and it was something that I pitched to him way back in 2009 and was able to get on the books and teach at UWL, and under a different name. It's called Navigating Global Nuclear Issues. So I've been teaching that for a few years as a gen ed class, and then that is the reason why Yale awarded me a presidential fellowship so I could take a version of this class and adapt it to the undergraduate students at Yale. So a lot of science majors take it, but it's not designed for science majors necessarily. I want students to understand that their work has implications, and I want students that aren't scientists to understand how science impacts the world. So instead, does that make sense?
Yeah, because I was going to ask you, as a science major, you actually need to know the social impact of whatever you're making. Some people just say, I don't make bombs, I just focus on the physics, but eventually what your work is going to be extended to whatever way the people want to use it. So you cannot simply just say, okay, that's not my business.
Exactly. But in science, and I'm sure it's this way in math as well, we think students need more and more and more content. So what we're pushing away, what we're pushing aside is all of that societal impact. And because we have this large gen ed program, we expect the gen ed side to take care of all that societal impact. But in fact, these classes didn't exist until I started developing them. And so what I did is I said, okay, well, these students are taking a history class, and they're taking a political science class, and they're taking all these classes in silos. And then at the very end, they're asked to take all of this knowledge and apply it to one topic. That is really, really hard to do. It's hard to do for us as PhD scientists. So it's going to be hard for students to do. So I said, okay, let's just do it for them so they see those connections. So I said, instead of them taking a bunch of subjects, I'm going to say, okay, let's look at one topic and show them how all the different subjects connect to that topic. So I said, let's look at the atomic bomb or, nuclear physics, because it's something that's been around for a really long time and has really made a huge impact in our lives. And then let's look at the history and the political science. Let's look at the culture. Let's look at the impact on different countries. Let's look at how it shapes our governmental policies, international law. And so all those connections are made for them. And then hopefully when they leave the class, they'll be able to start making connections like that on their own.
That's beautiful.
That's kind of the idea of the class.
What about the other half, which are the social science or like students in liberal arts who say, well, I don't really care about how the underlying scientific process going. I just care about, did you create jobs in economy? Did you actually change people's life? Or do you make any impact on arts or things like that? What do you expect them to get from this class? Like why do they want to know, or it's important for them to know the underlying science process going on in these kind of topics?
That's very interesting. So the class doesn't actually teach them the underlying science behind what we're talking about. This is actually more of a liberal arts class and a social science class than it is a science class. It's using science as the motivator behind learning the liberal arts and the social sciences. So we don't actually discuss fission. We don't discuss any of those concepts or processes. So the students have to be comfortable with science enough to be able to take the class. So that is kind of an impediment to some of the liberal arts students if they're not comfortable enough with physics to take the class. But I think it's important for the liberal studies students to understand how their work interacts with science, because we don't live in a vacuum. We don't live in, history is independent of literature, which is independent of science, none of our fields are independent. We all work together. And over time, we have we've made it that all of our fields are so independent. But I think it's important for science and liberal studies and social sciences to start working more together, because if we want to start changing problems in the future, we're going to have to be using everything at our disposal. And students need to understand all of these consequences and the way everything works together. So that's
beautiful put. Yeah.
In the class.
That's interesting because I listen to artificial intelligence podcast a lot. So maybe atoms is very far away. We think it's very far away from our life, even though it's everywhere. But a more fancy word is artificial intelligence right now is just like on the computer scientist side, they just say, I just want to write the algorithms. I don't care, or I don't want to worry about what my algorithm is going to do to the society. Meanwhile, there are so many people who are making regulations in the government about artificial intelligence who doesn't feel comfortable talking about technology, have no idea what artificial intelligence can do or cannot do. So it seems like there is a big gap here. There's a misinformation there. So it seems like class like this, if we can have more and more of them, can start to build those kind of connections so people can work together. So we can probably put the best usage of the science, right, to our society.
Absolutely, and that is that is a perfect example. So we have decades of knowledge from the way that society and nuclear science have interacted between the atomic bomb and politicians and research and national labs, and computer science and AI is the new guy on the block, right? But we have been dealing with these issues with nuclear weapons for decades. I have spoken to policymakers who don't want to know anything about nuclear weapons, although they make nuclear weapons policy. And they don't know the science, they don't know anything. And to me, that is terrifying. Just like people who are making AI policy don't know anything about the technology, and that's terrifying. So the question is, what do we do? And to me, it seems pretty obvious is that we need more people with science degrees in the policy world. And how do you get them interested? You have them take classes like mine that make them interested, because most of these students don't even know that this is an option because they're coming in from the political science world. But you need to get science students interested in political science. And after taking my class this semester, there were a couple of students who were interested in kind of pursuing that area. So if you can start getting students to attend graduate school, getting PhDs in physics or math or computer science, and then going into policy, then you're going to start seeing really good policy being made by people who understand both worlds. That's my dream, but you know, it's slow, and I'm one person.
That's beautiful. But you taught this class at Yale. Give it another 10 years, you will see some of the young guys become some policymakers later, and I'm pretty sure you're making a pretty big impact here. Just listening to it. Yeah.
Oh, I hope so. And I mean, this isn't a new idea. There are programs like this around the country, but they are very few and far between. I mean, there's a big program like this in nuclear energy. So there's money out there for nuclear engineers to get a nuclear engineering PhD and a policy master's degree. And one of my students from UWL is in one of these programs at University of Michigan, because this is what she wants to do. And she, part of this was after taking my class at UWL and realized that this is a way that she could mesh two of her interests. So another reason I teach this class is because a lot of research has shown is that in order to get underrepresented minorities and women interested in science and technology is to give them opportunities to help the community and to help the world. And we think that we do a really good job of that because we say, oh, with science, you can do anything. But that's not very concrete, right? Like, oh, you can do anything. Okay, what does that mean?
Nobody says that more than a math professor.
Right, so, but what do you mean? Give me a concrete example of what you mean by that. Right, you say that to an 18-year-old and what does that mean? They have no idea what you're talking about. But if you can give them a class like this or some other class that's very specific, and you can say, this is a job you can have that combine two interests, then you can get more people interested in studying science and technology because you can give them skills that they can use to directly impact their communities.
And it's not just a some job, it's a very important job. It's a job that needs to be done. It's very essential. And currently we probably have a lack of people who can do it well, simply because the way we teach both sides differently or like separately.
Right.
That's beautiful put. Yeah, that sounds like fun. So let's dive into that class. I just saw the syllabus.
Absolutely.
I become super excited.
What do you want to know?
Yeah, the first thing we talk about is, of course, let's go with the stereotype, nuclear bombs. Okay, Everybody have heard about this story before, and everybody knows what a nuclear bomb is. What I see that you actually pick a very interesting angle. That is, you want to talk about the impact of the nuclear bomb on Japan.
Yes.
So, what's the side of the story from Japan? How does the nuclear bomb just change their life? How big? How long is the impact?
Right. So the reason I call this class the impact of the atom is because when I taught it at Yale, it was taught in a seminar style, which means that every week the students and I would get together in a seminar room, and there was 20 of us, and we would just discuss the readings that were assigned for that week. So we are talking about the impact of the atom on Japan. And what I find interesting about discussing this with the US audience is that in the US education system, usually when discussing World War II, you're told the US dropped the atomic bomb on Japan, we won the war, and it was over. Is that the way you pretty much learned about the atomic bomb?
Basically, it's a victory, and no one cares about what happens 20 years after.
Or the day after. It was considered a great victory for the US, but we're never told about the implications of that bomb on people and places, especially in Japan. So I have the students read a book called Hiroshima by John Hershey. And it was the first account that the US audience had to what happened on the ground in Japan. And it's not a hard to read book as far as reading level. I mean, I think it's like a 6th or 7th grade reading level, but emotionally, it is a very, very difficult read because the book follows 6 people who are intertwined in some way. And it follows them from when the bomb dropped until a few days later, and then follows up after 20 years. And so you really see how the bomb impacted them immediately after and the days after. And the stories that are in there and the graphic images that are described make you realize that this is not just another piece of artillery, the way that it's described so often in the US narrative, that it's just a bomb, it's just a piece of artillery, there's a little bit of radiation, but it's not really that big of a deal. It was a very big deal. And you can see that in this book and in this writing. So this was kind of the first glimpse that people had in the US about what was going on the ground. And so that's why I think it's important for students to read this. And then I show the film White Light, Black Rain, which is actually the firsthand accounts of survivors. And they show pictures, they show their scars. And so this was in 2007, so this was quite some time after the bomb dropped. And it really gives students a perspective of how this event had impacted people decades after. And again, that it wasn't just another piece of artillery.
What's the most astonishing story you found in those kind of materials that impact your perspective on this the most?
I don't know. I think there's one quote in White Light, Black Rain that always stays with me. And that is a woman who she was just a little girl and she lost her sister. She lost her whole family. And she was desperate. I mean, she was just so heartbroken because she thought it was her fault. And she was standing on railroad tracks waiting to kill herself. And then she just finally realizes that there's 2 kinds of courage. There's the courage to die, and there's the courage to live. And she decided that she was going to be courageous and live. And that has just always kind of stuck with me about how hard it was for them to live after the bomb, that it took that much courage for her to continue on after her whole family was destroyed in kind of one instant.
It's crazy just thinking about, in addition to the physical damage, which is terrible, how big of the mental damage people receive, just seeing a whole city just gone within seconds.
Yeah. Right. And then there's another little boy who wrote an anime that was made into he wrote a comic that was made into a movie called Barefoot Gen, which is, it kind of puts this in perspective from a child's point of view, which is also very hard to watch, but I think also very impactful. So I highly recommend that. And so it's all very mentally exhausting. Like, you can't watch it all in one sitting or read it all in one sitting, but I think it really puts in perspective how devastating this weapon is. And if I could wish for anything, it would be that every person that has any influence in the government that deals with nuclear weapons needs to read and watch these things. Because if you understand how devastating this weapon is, then you would do everything you possibly could to not use it.
That's important, because I hear this kind of comments, or you can see it on social media everywhere, just like, I'm not happy with the country, let's just nuke them. Like, do you have any idea what you're saying?
No, they don't. They really don't, or they have no empathy. Because you just have to listen. I mean, and there's a website, Desto, that just gives firsthand accounts. And I mean, just the pain in these people's eyes is unlike anything you've ever seen. It's anyway, when I started looking into it, it really emotionally got to me, and I had to step away for a while because it's really emotional.
Plus, those kind of radioactive effect will last actually much longer than bombs. A lot of people got blood cancer, and they basically suffer for the rest of their life, and their relatives too, and the government. Yeah, it's hard to just even think about it. I've read some of these. It's really depressing. And that's probably one of the reasons. Have you heard like a lot of people just advocating, saying maybe we should just relaunch the nuclear experiments and videotape it in Nevada or something, to let's show people what you guys are talking about, like how crazy, how scary those kind of thing is, because you're just talking about you have never seen a nuclear weapon before. You have never seen a bomb before. It's bigger than anything you can see in a Hollywood movie.
No, but we don't have to redo it, because when we tested until 1993 or 96, and we have all this stuff on video. Like, we don't have to redo it. We tested so much, and we have it all videotaped, and we have these firsthand accounts. Like, we don't need any more testing. We've done it all. I mean, there's nothing left to do.
Yeah, we probably need to start actually just, encourage people to watch that. Maybe just watch the experimental videos for one atom bomb and just see how crazy that thing is.
It is. I mean, the problem is that it's been described multiple times as seductive, which is very interesting. And it's really kind of also hard to get past that scientists and leaders have just called it's seductive to watch. And I can imagine it would be, because as a scientist, it's an exciting problem, right? It's so powerful. Like, how can you build something that is that powerful? So in that sense, I'd love to see a test, but on the other hand, like, there's no way I'd ever advocate for doing one, because it's just, the only positive is it'd be really cool to see, and that's not worth all the countless negatives that go along with testing a nuclear weapon.
Wow. So do you think we learned from the history?
See, and this is where a class like this gets hard, because you have to try very hard. And as a scientist, this is hard, because we don't teach classes like this, right? We teach facts, we teach methods, we teach proofs. And in a class like this, you have an opinion that may be different than other people's using the same set of facts. And so it's really hard when students ask me, what do you think? Because you don't want to give your opinion when, it could sway someone else's opinion, or it may go against an opinion that is, given by current administration, or, right? I mean, it's hard, because, you're an authority in the class, but you want students to come to their own conclusions. So you want to present the facts and allow them to debate the points without influence in it. So it's very hard.
So how did the student take it? Did they came up with any interesting opinions you find fascinating?
They always come up with things. So this year I had an interesting variety of students. I had, most of them were science students. I had a lot of CS, physics, some bio students, but I also had ROTC students. They are very fond of this class. I get them a lot at UWL. I had them at Yale. I had an econ student, so that was very interesting. She had a lot of very interesting points to bring into class, and then history and political science. So there was a very nice variety of students that brought in a lot of different viewpoints into the class, which made for fascinating discussions.
Well, what are something the econ kids came up with?
So the econ student was very interested in how weapons impacted our national budget. So she wanted to talk a lot about that. And we landed up discussing the cost of nuclear weapons more than I usually do because of her interest in that. And so I had to do a lot of research on that. I mean, I knew they cost a lot.
What is the cost?
Now,
do you have a rough idea?
Billions per weapon.
Billions per weapon, just for that one bomb?
It's like I think it's oh, see, this is going to be bad. It's not billions per weapon, it's like billions overall.
Billions overall, okay. So that includes the weapon and then the development of the weapon and also the launching of the weapon?
No, that is just upkeep of the weapon.
I see.
Yeah, it doesn't count the planes and the launching systems. Those are, the planes are dual use, so they're used in the military or in the Air Force anyway. So they're not usually counted under the nuclear umbrella.
I see.
So there's this nuclear posture review that is an interesting read. It's about how, like what the status of our nuclear weapons and all of our systems are right now. And then also it was started under Obama and carried on through Trump, which is about upgrading our nuclear weapons. So right now our weapons we have a triad. We have submarines that have nuclear weapons on them. We have the air-based nuclear weapons, and then we have a land-based nuclear weapons, which are all of these ICBMs, which are in silos all over the Midwest. And they have reached their limitations. So we've upgraded them as much as we could, and now the Army, the Department of Defense says that they can't be upgraded anymore, or the upgrade would cost more than just replacing them altogether.
So they reached the limitation of budget.
I'm sorry, the limitation?
Yeah, the limitation of what? You said they reached their limitation. The limitation of budget, or?
Oh, not budget, no.
So what do you mean by limitation?
So this is interesting. So the limitation is going to be what the confidence is that if we launch them, they're going to launch and to work. Huh.
Interesting. So if they make more, there is no guarantee that they will work, is it?
Well, we're under a treaty that we can't make more. We can't make more weapons. So what we're doing is something called stockpile stewardship, which is we are replacing parts on our nuclear weapons right now to keep them ready for launch. But it's the systems that are getting old. So when you look at the land-based systems, these were built, I think, in the 60s. And the question is, are they still going to, they have all these moving parts. They were built in the 60s. Things get rusted, things get old. Are they still compatible with new systems? And the DoD is saying, well, we really need to scrap all those and build brand new ones. This is, I think, I don't know, it's in the trillions. I want to say it's like $4 trillion that it's going to cost the US to upgrade all these systems. It is in the budget right now. The question is that people are asking is, do we need this? Do we need to upgrade our systems? Do we need do we need the triad? Do we need land, sea, and air-based systems? Yeah, and there are a lot of people that know a lot more about this than I do. I mean, people just study this.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting to think about. And a gentleman, an author named Richard Rhodes, came to Yale and gave a talk about this, about, how many weapons do we need? How many is enough? How many do we need in the ground? So he wrote the book, Making of the Atomic Bomb, which is kind of the authority when it comes to the history of the Manhattan Project. And he gave this wonderful talk about, I mean, this was even before COVID, but, if you want healthcare in the US, where are you going to find that money? Well, there's trillions of dollars sitting in this upgrade of the nuclear defense system that would definitely give healthcare to the US. So I guess what's important to us as a society, and is there any political will to do something like that? And do we need the triad? Do we need nuclear weapons? And I don't have answers to these questions. It's just,
that's interesting to think about. Yeah, because as a layman as me, I just say, like, you heard this kind of story all the time. It just, the bomb we have is enough to bomb the whole earth for hundreds of times. I mean, for me, I don't know much about this. It seems like it's not necessary even for more than twice or even once.
We have this nuclear umbrella. So there are a lot of countries in the world that have agreed not to develop nuclear weapons because we say we will use ours to protect them, which means we need nuclear weapons in multiple places around the earth instead of just in one place. Right? So that accounts for some of them. But China has less than 100 nuclear weapons.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And no one's bombing them. No one, thinks China's weak, but the US and Russia have thousands of weapons. And the relationship between the US and Russia isn't getting any better. And there is fear of a second arms race, especially as the treaties between the US and Russia are falling away. And there's one treaty left. We used to have multiples. There's one treaty left, and if that goes away, there's no treaty of verification, meaning that we can't make sure that the Russians are getting rid of their weapons or any safety on their weapons, and they can't check ours. And this is the first time since the end of the Cold War that we're not going to have a treaty together. And personally, and for a lot of people in the nuclear community, this is a very uncomfortable situation in which the Russians are going to go unchecked. That means we're also going to go unchecked, but that's a bilateral treaty, is that you check each other and keep each other honest, which is, I think, kind of important.
Wow. So actually we can jump on that right away. So are you saying, how big is the chance that we're going to have a second round of Cold War?
Again, this is an opinion.
Yeah, personal opinion.
So personally, this is totally just my opinion. I am very uncomfortable with the rhetoric of the current administration. Recently in the news, there has been talk about restarting testing, which is very uncomfortable for me. There has been discussion about not renewing New START, which is the treaty I was discussing. The current administration pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal. I personally think that we're moving in the wrong direction when it comes to nuclear security. But that is my personal opinion. There's going to be people in the administration that think the complete opposite, or they wouldn't be doing what they're doing. But I think that leads us I think we're moving in a not so good direction.
Wow. I guess we all got a sense of that, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's something I just tend to not want to think about.
I think it's best if you don't think about it.
Yeah. Otherwise, all kinds of things can actually end the civilization right here, right now.
Yeah, so, just concentrate on the pandemic for now.
Well, since we're talking about the pandemic, you also actually had a week talking about the impact of nuclear physics in health and medical.
Yeah.
So what's going on there?
Nuclear physics is actually quite prevalent in healthcare. So have you ever had a MRI or... Yes? Well, That is actually a nuclear process. it's actually a nuclear magnetic resonance image, but they didn't want people to get scared off, so they called it a MRI instead of an NRI, an NMR. Cancer treatments use linear accelerators. There are a lot of imaging now that uses radioisotopes as tracers. So there is, I think the last statistic I saw is 70% of outpatient treatments are nuclear.
Wow, 70%.
70%.
Wow, no kidding.
Yeah, so I mean, if I were to guess, and I'm sure someone has done the calculation, nuclear physics has saved more people than it has killed.
That's fair,
Definitely.
yeah. MRI, fMRI, and I mean, recently MRI becomes super popular in terms of like research on neuroscience, right? We just take images of the brain and everything. So yeah, for me, it's not surprising because I have always been knowing, but 70% is a pretty stunning number.
It's a very high number. I mean, when you just think about the diagnostic imaging that's done to prevent things from happening, that's a huge number, right? If you do some sort of like angiogram testing to look at a heart blockage and then you prevent some sort of heart attack, that's a nuclear procedure that prevented a heart attack. But then you look at all the cancer treatment that's happening, and all of that radiation therapy is saving people as well. So I mean, just that is a huge amount of lives saved by using some sort of nuclear physics. And what's really interesting is that it was started because of the space race.
What's the story there?
I was gonna say, I was waiting for you to be like, what? Because all my students are like, what? What do you mean? So when Kennedy announced that we were going to send a man to the moon, scientists didn't know if a man would actually survive in space because of all the radiation. They then
You mean the radiation from the cosmological ray, or?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of radiation in space, and they thought, well, once they get up into space, are they going to die from all of the radiation? That they went about, so a lot of money was thrown at research labs to study this. And so that's really how nuclear medicine was born, was looking at all of the radiation from trying to figure out how much radiation that a person could survive. The other thing was, during the Cold War and the making of the bombs, they needed to understand how much radiation workers who were making bombs could survive as well. So unfortunately, a lot of this, when you deal with medicine back in the 50s and 60s, you're dealing with a lot of not so good practices. And there's a whole book called The Plutonium Files that discusses all of the not good things, including a lot of human testing that was done in the name of science and the Cold War during this time period.
Wow. Yeah, that's, every time you go back to go to those kind of period, I think it's between 1960s all the way to 1980s. There are so many not so good practical things done in the name of science. Yeah, I've recently read a little about all the experiments done during that period by psychology, which is another interesting piece to look at. Well,
yes.
So I guess, so everywhere you go to the hospital, it's actually very common for you to see a lot of treatments and equipments built using nuclear technology compared to less common. It's actually more common, better than average.
Absolutely.
That's nice. Yeah. What about nuclear energies?
Nuclear energy is something that the US gave up on a long time ago after 3 Mile Island, but it is more prevalent in many other parts of the world. And it's something that I find that the younger generations are much more interested in than older generations. And I think I have my theory about this. And my theory is younger generations are much more interested in reversing climate change. And what they see is, they know climate change is going to happen. That is for certain climate change is happening, and it's going to have a huge impact. Something going wrong with nuclear energy is a maybe something will happen. So again, this is just my theory. So they're saying the rationale for them is we can use this technology, which is going to give us energy, which is going to give us a lot of energy, which is going to power cities, which maybe something might happen to solve a problem that is definitely going to happen. And so I find that younger people are much more willing to say, let's start building nuclear reactors now. Like, we have to. If we want to stop climate change, we have to build nuclear reactors. It's very refreshing to hear.
It's a risk we're willing to take in order to solve a bigger problem, right?
Yes. And I mean, there are new reactor designs, and there are countries who are doing it extremely safe. In France, 70% of their energy is from nuclear. And I mean, I haven't heard about a big accident happening in France.
But we at the media, they always advocate nuclear bombs and then Chernobyl, like what happens in Russia. And so, you hear all these kind of stories on the media. So you just associate like, yeah, this is not safe because have you ever seen a nuclear bomb? So my question here is, like, when you say extremely safe, so really, how safe is nuclear energy? Like, if we build a nuclear reactor, what can go wrong?
I mean, a lot can go wrong, but a lot can go wrong on any energy source. Nuclear energy per terawatt hour is the safest energy source.
When you factor in the risk?
Yes.
Even when you factor in the risk. Okay, so that clarifies a lot of things. It's not like what I imagine is just like if the nuclear reactor stops working, somehow you're going to have a nuclear bomb. Just like a
no. You can't have no. It's the nuclear reactor. Nuclear reactors are designed to scram, which means to shut themselves off in the majority of cases. Well, I mean, they are. The reactor issues that have happened is when people have overridden the reactor.
Oh, I see.
And the problems that have happened have been lack of cooling. And there are ways to, like I said, there are new reactor designs.
Okay, so with the new design, this one is probably way more safer than what we had before.
Yes.
But let's say, even if with a little tiny chance nothing went wrong, what kind of damage can that thing cause?
If something goes wrong, what kind of damage?
Yeah, like number one, the risk is really low, right? Because we have new designs and it's very unlikely that thing is going to go wrong. But even if that thing goes wrong, like how bad the damage can be.
So if something goes wrong, how bad can it be?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's Fukushima and Chernobyl.
Cool, but it's still actually fulfilling to actually hear that nuclear energy is the safest energy, even after you weigh in the risk factor. Just given how much energy that thing can produce, given a certain risk, that's actually safest, right?
Yeah, and I mean, if you just look at how many people die from pollution every year, for example, like, I think we can agree that coal's pretty much horrific.
Yeah.
Yet we still burn coal.
Same thing with gas.
Yeah, and gas is horrible too. Gas explodes all the time. We just don't hear about it. And I think the way I always describe it is, you don't hear about car crashes on the news, right? You never hear about them. To me, that's like gas and coal disaster. That's like gas and coal explosions. But as soon as a plane crashes, you hear about it. Even if it's like a 2-person Cessna, you'll hear about the plane crash. That is a nuclear incident. Even if it's like something so minor, you'll hear about it. But gas and coal and they can do anything that they want, and no one's going to hear about it.
Interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective.
Those are all the car crashes, and car crashes kill way more people than than airplane crashes do, but people feel so much safer in a car than they do in an airplane.
Sadly, I do too, which is not scientific, too scientific, but I still trust my driving.
It's not scientific at all,
Interesting. So another thing I want to talk about in nuclear energy, that is in addition to electricity, is what about nuclear engine? I heard about this kind of thing in sci-fi. Is that a real thing? Like you can build a nuclear reactor and put it into a spaceship, or even better, you can put it in a car, or a boat, or a ship.
So people worked on this. You right now you can't put like a nuclear reactor in, but the Mars rover was powered by plutonium, so you can use nuclear sources to power things. So if we want to get to Mars and we want to go further into the solar system, we're going to have to use nuclear source. We're going to have to do something with nuclear because it's the only thing that can power a spaceship for a long period of time. I mean, but there are nuclear reactors on subs, so that's why subs can stay down for so long.
Yeah, I heard that thing all the time. Like Elon Musk is advocating a lot about going to Mars, but when I look at the design of the rocket, it's still the old design from 1960s, right? They're still using chemical, maybe liquid fuels, not nuclear, anything related to nuclear. So
it's going to have to be nuclear. I mean, we couldn't even get a rover to Mars without nuclear. I mean, I personally just don't see there being any other option, but I don't know, I mean, Elon Musk makes a hell of a lot more money than I do, so I'm assuming that means he knows more than me.
Actually, speaking of space travel, you actually mentioned this thing in your syllabus, that is the relationship between nuclear and space traveling. Other than building a nuclear engine, are there any other kind of ways to use nuclear power to help? I heard those kind of ideas is like, one idea is like you build some kind of like sail and then use nuclear bomb to actually just boost it. Is that even a thing?
That was an idea back in the 60s as well. But Dyson had that idea, but it turns out it wasn't a very good one. It wouldn't work.
Why wouldn't it work? Sounds like a pretty easy idea.
It does sound like an easy idea. I don't remember exactly why it wasn't going to work, but he decided it wasn't going to work. What I mentioned on space travel, it was the research having to do with NASA on the impact of radiation on, the people in space.
Oh.
And there's actually right now a lot of research being done on space and radiation because if you want to travel to Mars as well, you're gonna have a lot of radiation protection because there is more radiation in space. And if people want to go to Mars, they're gonna have to be able to be protected from that radiation.
That's interesting. Yeah, I heard maybe somewhere people are I think NASA is trying to build a base on the moon, and not just Mars. As long as you go out of the atmosphere, you need to seriously think about cosmological ray.
Exactly.
And then they were trying to think about even just like build a small base on moon and make sure somehow find a way to start to build things on the moon and eventually launch the spaceship from the moon to the Mars, so we don't have to worry about how to get out of the control of the gravity of Earth.
Yeah, so, and it's true. I mean, and the further away you get from the Earth, like the higher up in the atmosphere you go, you get more radiation. So when you fly, you get more radiation than you do when you're on the ground. When you live, high up in the mountains, you get more radiation than you do when you're at sea level. So when you go, if you try to live on the moon, you're going to get a lot more radiation. And at some point, it's going to start impacting you. And there's a lot of research going on in radiation biology, actually, is a thing about how this is going to affect people, but then also nuclear physics and nuclear or radiation biology about materials that can be used to help try to mitigate that. And that's pretty much all I know. I don't know everything about it. And that's something that's very interesting about this class. And I think that's hard for people, especially kind of at our level, is because this class covers so many topics, I'm not the expert in every topic, right? And so a lot of times I have to say to students, like, I don't know, like, I'm not the expert in this. I know a lot of things on each of these topics, but there are a lot of questions that I just simply can't answer. And that's part of the learning experience for me as well, is to then go and figure out the answers or talk to people or bring in guest speakers or lecturers to class to be the expert about these topics. But I think it's hard for us as professors to go outside of our comfort zone and go outside of our area of expertise and to actually say to students, like, I don't know, like, I'm not an expert.
That's beautiful, right? You create those kind of learning opportunities with your students. So you guys can all check materials and talk about the ideas at the same time. I started to actually see why teaching it as a seminar is actually an amazing way to do it compared to like regular lecturing.
Yeah,
because so many people can bring to so many things people can bring to the table.
Yeah, it was so much fun. I mean, it was, and so when we went online, we just Zoomed. I mean, because there were only 20 of us, we just Zoomed in and just had the same conversation. So it really didn't change that much. It was so much fun.
Beautiful. Now, I also mentioned, I also see you mentioned in your syllabus, which is pretty weird to look at the first time, which is nuclear and art.
Yes.
So what's there?
It's fun.
What's nuclear and what art?
So how has nuclear energy or nuclear weapons or nuclear policy, so anything with nuclear or atomic, like how has that influenced artists? And surprisingly, there are a lot of artists who have been influenced by these topics. So there are some that are pretty obvious. There's a scientist slash artist that uses old bomb parts to make sculptures, right? So that's kind of obvious. But then there's like, and other obvious ones are like Andy Warhol did an atomic bomb kind of series. That's just kind of like the plume, the mushroom cloud, which I think is probably one of the most iconic symbols in our culture, right? The mushroom cloud, everybody knows what that is. But then there are other items that are not so obvious. There is a series of posters by General Dynamics that they were a defense contractor, and they had a PR person that was an artist, and like an artist PR person that did this series of posters and postcards that tried to show the general public the benefits of nuclear energy and nuclear science. And so these postcards are very like mid-century modern science-y, kind of like put into the culture. And so that art is in the form of these like mass-produced posters. And so the nuclear physics has influenced that kind of like advertisement field. And then there's also a lot of posters, because it also plays into a lot of Russian propaganda during the Cold War. And so that's a lot of fun, those posters. And then there's also a variety of, I have listed here this time-lapse map of every nuclear explosion since 1945 by a Japanese artist, which is shocking to see. And then there's also a variety of artists that have used nuclear landscapes and a lot of kind of like nuclear Americana kind of pieces. Like nuclear bombs have been used in a lot of like buildings and art in that way. Like as you drive across the country, it was really big in like the 50s, especially around Vegas. And so the mushroom clouds and the symbol of a bomb kind of used a lot, and you see them in paintings and in pictures. So if you kind of know where to look, you can see these things, but it was very prevalent in the 50s and 60s. And so because of this prevalence, it really made its way into a lot of the pictures and a lot of, you know, like photographs of artists, and then a lot of paintings. So it's,
yeah, that thing is impactful enough that thing itself become a symbol, right? So now if you just see the symbol, you clearly get the message and the feelings and the concepts too. Yeah.
And you do know that it's fully integrated into culture when the artists start using it.
Makes sense.
Right? Like that it's become, like you said, it's become the symbol that everybody recognizes.
I'm pretty sure if you go to any part of the world and show people a mushroom cloud, everybody knows what you're talking about.
Yes.
Right. And not to mention the emotional feelings and all the concepts associated to that single symbol there, which is kind of cool. Yeah. Actually, nuclear, not just bomb, right? If I just think about, like, if you want to show some people something is scientific, something is cool, you always give them like a proton and with several particles around it, right? Just seeing the nuclear particles suddenly just make everything, you know, cool. And if you want to make it even cooler, just say quantum. And then suddenly something just become 10 times cooler. Even though lay people doesn't know what it means, but still, I feel excited every time I see pictures like that.
Yeah, and I think some of that comes from after the Manhattan Project and the war was won. And I mean, there's a book out there that says World War II, the war that physics won, right? Like there's so many things that came up during World War II that had this huge impact on winning the war. I mean, the bomb is one, but a radar is another that was discovered, you know, that was built during World War II. But after the war, scientists were revered. I mean, physicists were just like, everyone wanted to be a physicist. It was like the thing. And so some of that, you know, the atom being the symbol and scientists being cool was what happened after the war. And I think that's probably where some of that atomic symbol being this really cool thing happened was, you know, after the war, the atom was going to be this energy source that was limitless. Like they were going to bring, you know, power to the desert. You were going to be able to, you know, I think the saying was power that was going, you know, like you weren't going to even be able to, power so limitless it was going to be free or something, like, you know, it was going to be so plentiful that we wouldn't even be able to meter it. Like that's how much power we were going to get out of nuclear energy. And so there was just a lot of hope and a lot of excitement around nuclear right after the war and through probably the 60s.
Do you want to live during that period? Because for me, if I just think about it, it's so exciting. Every day, just new discoveries and new ways of applying technologies and physics compared to where in our field is like physics, theoretical physics doesn't have that many like breakthroughs since then, right?
I mean, they're different. I mean, it really kind of was the golden age. If you can take all the societal stuff out of it, right? Like as a woman, I probably wouldn't have been very welcome there.
I mean,
so if you can take all of like the good society things that we have now and take it back with all like the really great science stuff, then yeah, but that's the problem with going back there, is that you also have to take into account that there were lots of bad shit going on too.
Yeah, but yeah, every time I read physics about, you know, what's going on during that period, you know, like people are inventing computers, theoretical physics are doing their job, and you know, we discovered double helix structures, and just, you know, exciting things just constantly go on and on and on.
And if I can remove myself from what the bomb was, when you read the Manhattan Project, like it was so exciting. Like you had unlimited money. Like money was no object. Like the saying was, time is more important than money. So money was just thrown at scientists. So you're talking about people who had to beg to do anything, like for every dollar. And suddenly they're said, do whatever you want. You want something, buy it. And you worked with, I mean, there were Nobel Prize winners there. You worked with the best physicists from around the world. You would have dinner in their living room, right? Like you met with them on a daily basis. You were all working to solve one problem. And you did it very quickly. And there was all this stuff to discover. Like it would just be, I mean, that part is just exciting. Like just to all be working for that one goal with no impediment whatsoever is just like, to me, just, yeah, that part is exciting. And then you have to stop and think, I'm actually building something that's going to kill millions of people. Then it's not so exciting.
Yeah, there's a reason why you have unlimited budget, right?
Right.
That's
right.
a competition. You are trying to win a war here, and that war, everything is just, the thing at stake is so high that's why we're willing to put all stuff on that thing and do things at any cost.
Right. Right.
That's interesting,
I mean,
though. That's why we hear. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I was gonna say, but reading the accounts of the scientists, like you can completely understand why they didn't think about what they were doing, because they were just so excited. I mean, once you get, I mean, as a scientist, you understand, like, once you get your teeth into a problem, like you're not gonna stop until you solve it. Right?
Yeah. Plus, there are so many smart people around you. So basically, you just, just ideas comes and go back and forth and become better and better at every moment. So that is really exciting. Just thinking about it makes me excited. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, it's amazing. Why can't we do research in the same way, though? Because if I think about it, you hear all those kind of things. Why do we want to build another big accelerators using taxpayers' money to basically build toys for physicists? I hear this kind of argument all the time, and I find it hard to convince people like, this is necessary, this is important, until I actually listen to a podcast where Eric Weinstein, a theoretical physicist, actually made a comment that is, basically physics built the whole economy.
Yeah.
Right? We discovered like electricity. That's why we have we have the Industrial Revolution. And then they invented transistors. That's why all the economies are built on. They're built on computers, but computers can work because they invented transistors. And then internet. And then all those kind of interesting things. So if those physicists ever charged like 10 cents for every time you use a transistor, they won't need any taxpayers' money to build the accelerator. They will be the richest people in the world.
And that's the thing, is that most physicists aren't, I mean, physicists are interested in sharing their results. There aren't a lot of physicists that have patents, for example.
You can't put a patent on like quantum mechanics. Otherwise, how would that thing even work, right?
No, but you could put a patent on a transistor.
Yeah, and you will be the richest person in the world, I bet.
But physicists aren't, I mean, the physicists I know, of course, they're not thinking that way. Because I work with a bunch of experimentalists, and I mean, no one's thinking about patents. You're just thinking about, oh, I'm writing this code, or I'm building this, and then I'm going to send it out to people so they can make it too.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just not the way we think. And
that's the beauty. That's the beauty of it, right? But when people started saying like, why do we want to build toys for, researchers to play with ideas, we should really step back and think about how much actually those kind of research has impacted the society in terms of money.
And I think that, I mean, I think this class also helps because, I mean, for example, so many discoveries that are made aren't made because we're directly funding them. They're made kind of on accident, right?
That's true, yeah.
Some of the first computers weren't made because we were funding computers. They were made because nuclear physicists needed to do their calculations quicker. And so nuclear physicists decided they needed computers. So it's not like someone could go like, oh, we need to fund a computer. It was like, no, they were made out of necessity to do something else. So it's really hard to say like, what's the next best, what's the next greatest thing's going to be, because the next greatest thing is going to be something that needs to be built to fill a need of something else. And
yeah, same thing with the internet, right? It was just invented to exchange information between the physicists in order to do physics.
Right. So maybe that next greatest thing is going to be because you're building this huge accelerator. You don't know, but there is definitely going to be some great detectors that come out of these accelerators. There's going to be some great, there's going to be a lot of great equipment that comes out of this accelerator that people aren't going to realize how it impacts their lives. And it's just so hard to quantify how much.
It's impossible to predict what's going to happen because a lot of them are just like a side invention, right?
Exactly.
But the key is just, when you find the research, people are tackling the hardest problem. They will use all kinds of things they can.
Yes.
In order to solve the hardest problem, then during that process, all kinds of interesting ideas will come.
Exactly.
In order to make it work, right? So that's actually exciting thing. So even thinking about it, actually, I don't think it's go back to the unlimited budget thing.
Yeah.
for the Manhattan Project. It sounds like crazy, but when you think about it, actually maybe it's actually not a bad business model. Just to throw all the money throw all the money you can to the theoretical studies and see what comes out of it.
I mean, it was theoretical and experimental studies, right?
Yeah, but the harder problems.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting, but now we have so much infrastructure, right? Like you get a grant and your university takes a bit, and then this person takes a bit, and this person takes a bit, and then by the time you get the money, and then you've got to fill out all this paperwork, and all these people wanted you to. By this time, like when you have a research grant, so much of your time is just spent on administration.
Yeah, for sure. That's part of the reason. Yeah, I'm not too hot about those kind of things. But do you think those kind of products can ever happen again? For what purpose? Just like the best scientists all come together working on a problem with a lot of budget.
I'd like to think so.
Maybe space traveling.
I don't know. I mean, it unfortunately it'd have to be a government-run project, right? Like,
mm-hmm.
I know, like a lot of my physics students want to go work for SpaceX, but in order for something like the Manhattan Project to happen again, or even NASA's, man on the moon, it's going to have to be a government push. It's going to have to, the government's going to have to say, we need the best people to come and work for us, and we're going to pay you. And if it's a government call, then maybe universities will keep jobs open, or maybe people can work part-time. I mean, but I don't think, a lot of tenured professors are going to give up their tenure track job to go work at SpaceX, where they could get laid off. They could get laid off at the whim of the CEO. I mean, I wouldn't do it. I mean, we choose academia for a reason, and that's not to go work for a CEO at some company that, can lay us off tomorrow.
That's interesting. Yeah, I would like to see maybe even for once in my life, just something like this will go on. Then I will be super proud to be born at this time, just to be part of the audience, not even part of the participant, just part of the audience. We're super excited.
The Trump administration did say that he's going to assemble a coronavirus task force that will be bigger than he's going to, what was it? He said something about assembling a coronavirus something that's going to be bigger than the Manhattan Project.
Well, we will see.
I mean, if he does, that would be amazing. I just don't know where the infrastructure is going to be. It'd have to be like a virtual task force or a virtual research something. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
It would be interesting.
Okay, so we talk about a lot about nuclear's impact on a lot of things. You also mentioned nuclear and human rights.
Yeah.
I couldn't even picture what you want to talk about there. So what is exactly what you want to talk about there, like nuclear and human rights?
A lot of people don't see the connection there. Let me see what I had listed for readings. This one was a stretch, but I do say human rights and ethics.
Yep.
So there's a historical perspective, and then there is a modern perspective. And the historical perspective is definitely there. It was the Manhattan Project, the scientists that came from Nazi-occupied areas in Europe that started bringing other scientists from Nazi-occupied Europe into the US and to the UK. So it really was the scientists that started acting as kind of like middlemen to get scientists out of occupied land. So they had a direct connection there. They also started kind of like they would go around to different universities and try to find people that would say, okay, I will take 3 scientists, or I will take this many scientists, and then they would contact people in Europe and actually bring them over. And I think that is a direct impact on human rights. They were literally saving individual people from Europe and bringing them over. There's also some interesting stories about how Bohr actually saved all the Jews in Denmark, I believe it was, by flying to another Scandinavian country and speaking to the king, who then allowed all of the Jews into his country, so then saved them from Nazi invasion. So
really, Bohr did that?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. I need to read more about that. That was that was like a story given to this author. And so this is something that I'm writing an article about the history of science, history of physics and human rights. And so this is a story that I want to go into the archives and make sure it's true, because it was told by someone.
Oh, I see.
And secondhand accounts aren't really always true, but it's such a good story that if it is true, like, it's amazing. I do know the exchanges are actually absolutely true. Then there are the other interesting thing is the way that CERN was established. So CERN is the large research facility in Europe. And it was a couple of gentlemen from the Manhattan Project who saw that nuclear science was getting very big. And nuclear science couldn't be done by individuals at universities anymore. And they knew that they had to have a large facility like the, Los Alamos and what was going to be Livermore. And all the small countries, especially coming out of war, weren't going to be able to do it by themselves. And so they needed to be able to combine their resources to be able to get something large. So they went and were able to get their governments to agree to create CERN. Now, on itself, it's not a human rights issue, but in the charter, they made sure to say that CERN would always be free of weapons work, of any sort of government military work. And it is true today that CERN will not engage in any sort of war work. So I think that is a very interesting thing in CERN's charter, or whatever that document is called, that no scientist will take part in war work on CERN's grounds. When the Soviet Union collapsed, they reached out to the scientists that were working on the bombs in the Soviet Union and offered them to come to CERN and work with them so that they could develop their skills and make connections in the scientific community so they could get out of weapons work. So those are just a couple examples of the way that CERN is working with kind of human rights. And so in human rights, I don't know exactly what you think of when you think of human rights, but human rights is a very, very broad category. And I'm on this committee. The American Physical Society has a committee on the international freedom of scientists where we deal with human rights in physics. And some of those human rights are, making sure not just people who have been jailed, right? So a lot of times people think of human rights and they think of Amnesty International and they think of if someone is in jail and not receiving due process, or is in jail for kind of political activism, those sort of things. But there's also kind of scientific rights. And there is a charter there is this, there's a bill of scientific rights from the UN that list all of these things that people everywhere in the world should have access to. And some of those things are that scientists should be able to move freely and collaborate with one another, and everyone in the world should be able to have equal access to science. So we shouldn't be keeping advancements in science from anyone. And what's been really interesting is about how, so that's where the CERN part comes in, is that they're saying, if you don't want to work on weapons work, you don't have to, but you can still do science and you can still be funded with science. And so that's kind of this ethical human right. Like, you don't have to work on weapons if you don't want to. So that's why it's in the human rights category. The other one is this free exchange. So when the US or Russia decides that, so when Russia decides that, or the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union during the Cold War decided that they're not allowing any of their nuclear scientists out of Russia, of the Soviet Union, then that is an impingement on their human rights because they're not allowed to leave. So those are some examples of human right abuses or examples of human rights in science.
That makes sense. Yeah, think about forcing scientists doing the research they don't want, and also forbidding scientists from doing the research they want can certainly be viewed as human rights. And also thinking about the ethical side, after the invention of the nuclear bomb, I think every scientist knows that how big the impact they can have on the real world. So almost every community, biology, psychology, artificial intelligence, and everything, just develop those kind of mindset that is, there are certain things we don't do, and there is a certain boundary we just, we need to agree on ourselves, just we never touch.
You would like to think that. It is. So I have some friends in CS around the world, around the world, and you'd be surprised how many students, like, their goal is in CS is to develop some sort of great program that they can just sell and be a millionaire, and they really don't worry about how that program is going to be used.
Really?
Absolutely.
Oh, interesting.
So
maybe it's because they're just students. Maybe eventually when they become a mature scientist, they will start to worry about those kind of things. Because I recently just read a little bit about artificial intelligence, and I think it's in 2015 or 17, they actually have an agreement. It's almost like self-regulation, and everybody signs on, just say, I don't develop, for example, weapon to a certain extent using artificial intelligence, and there are certain things we just don't do.
I hope that's true.
It's true, but it's not required. It's almost like people just, a lot of well-known people sign it, and they're trying to advocate for more people to sign it.
This is something, though, that I think, so we, as older scientists, want to think that this is obvious. But if we don't teach students or young people, how are they supposed to know that there are these lines, or what the ethics are? And do they really know that what the impact of the atomic bomb was?
That's what part of what you're trying to do with your class, right?
Right. So if we assume they know these things, but I don't think we can. Like, if we don't point these things out, then it's on us, right? Because I don't know that the students know this. I don't know that they've given it any thought.
You would thought this is common sense, but actually no, right?
I don't think you can. And yeah. I'm not saying it's their fault. We have a lot more, we're academics. We have a lot of time that this is what we do. We sit and we think about things and we discuss them with each other. we're not 18 or 19 or 20 worrying about getting a job or making money or supporting our family or buying a house. Like, we're not worried about that stuff, right? We're at a place in our lives that we can think about these things, and can't imagine the time when we weren't like this. So I think we have to teach classes like this, and we have to make this part of the curriculum. If we want students to think about ethical consequences, if we want students to make ethical choices, or at least consider it, we have to make it part of the curriculum, and we have to teach them. Then we know they know.
Yeah, especially I think for computer science, it's gaining more and more social impact.
Absolutely.
And almost every single computer scientist or a software engineer is going to make a huge impact on the society, given how many times the program can amplify what one person can do.
Yes.
And I see a growing, design of classes in terms of like data ethics, because big data kind of become a hot thing, right? Data ethics and algorithm ethics. But I can certainly say for sure that it's not taught enough yet.
No. And it's not mandatory, I think, for a lot of places. Like, I don't think it's just enough to have it. It needs to be mandatory, or it also needs to be worked into classes. So I don't think you necessarily need just a single class. What you need, especially in CS and data science, and even in all of the sciences, it's not one class. You need it integrated into all your classes so that students see how important it is. If it's just like one standalone class and it's like, oh, this one professor cares about it. But if it's integrated through, then it's like, oh, this is something the field cares about, and it's something that I should care about, and it's something I should think about.
Does things like this ever existed? Those kind of ethic classes planted into every single part of a certain field, in any scientific field, not just physics?
I don't know. I don't know of a program. I could be completely wrong.
Do you think they can be taught with all the science together? It's like, you just learn this ethics about scientifics, no matter your biology or chemistry. So it has to be, every discipline need to have its own.
Because biology is very specific, right? Because they have human subjects, they have animal subjects. Oh, I do know biology does have biological ethics. Like, they have like this huge thing. So biology might do it.
Just thinking about health definitely has it.
Definitely.
Like medical, right? Definitely they have it.
But I mean, I think it's different. I mean, it's almost like maybe math, physics, and chemistry could do it, but biology is completely different, because you deal with squishy stuff, and the rest of us don't deal with squishy stuff.
It all depends on, do you involve a human object or not, right?
Right.
Yeah. Interesting.
But I mean, until I joined this committee, I just didn't have any idea that there was there were scientific rights.
I heard about it today for the first time. That's why when you say human rights and atoms, I didn't even know what you mean by that.
Right. Until that, I didn't even know about it until that committee. And then I'm like, wow, there's all this stuff going on that is very interesting and impacts people's lives. And science does impact people's lives, and it does impact people's human rights, right? Energy is something that science gives to people that helps improve their lives. And I think this is another way to get people interested in studying science, is if you can bring it to the human rights. Like, if you can show them how science really impacts people, then this is another way to get young people interested in studying science, instead of just, although we think quantum mechanics is cool, a lot of young people might not think it's really cool.
That's interesting. Yeah. I probably there's a good way to start is just like teaching the history of this, right? How science has impacted the society before, which I think you have probably tons of stories you can tell. Everybody in any discipline has a tons of stories they can tell, even in mathematics, how that thing impacted the society in terms of actually arts, even.
Yes.
It's actually everywhere. Interesting. So we talk a lot about the class you're teaching. I think you talk about everything almost I can think about, or even something I cannot think about in. Yeah. Are there any new thing you're trying to put into this class next time you teach it? Or you're looking forward to?
So the class that I taught at Yale was different than the one at UWL. And so I was on sabbatical at Yale, and the first semester I didn't teach the class. I spent a lot of time kind of reworking the class and then to be able to teach it as a seminar. And what I'm working on this summer and what I'm really looking forward to is bringing a lot of the elements that I worked on during sabbatical and integrating them back into my class at UWL, because I think a lot of these topics that I explored on sabbatical are really interesting to bring into the class at UWL. So that's what I'm working on.
You mind giving us some preview?
So I'm going to make the class online because of COVID. And I'm going to cut down on, I did a lot of material about the Manhattan Project, about the science, and with the way that some of the student feedback has been on the UWL class, and the feedback that I got from the class at Yale, I think the way that the syllabus that you have, I think this is kind of a better way to do it. And so I'm going to be bringing a lot more of the kind of the human rights and the art and the, so yeah, human rights, ethics, art. I'm going to be bringing culture. I'm going to be bringing a lot more of that into the UWL class.
Well, that sounds like a lot of fun. If I'm a student, I'm looking forward to taking it. Seriously, like so many good readings there. Yeah.
And I'm also going to be doing some, so the discussions, like you had mentioned, like the seminar style was really fun. So I'm going to try to bring in some small group discussions for the class so that we can discuss some of these issues. So I'll have some kind of like an overarching question that I'll ask students to discuss in their group, and then meet with me and we can discuss it together. Maybe 4 or 5 students together. I think that would be a good way to do it. And then hopefully have some of those really great discussions about some of these harder questions, the questions that kind of don't have an answer to them.
That's beautiful put. I don't know. It's just me maybe, but I think more people need to hear about this. Like, seriously, like the discussion, I mean it, like the discussion happened in your class, it will be beneficial for other people, even though they may not be able to join the discussion, but just hearing about what people's conclusions are, or like what people's opinions are on those kind of questions. That's part of the reason I'm doing this podcast too. That is, like, I do a lot of things in my class and students think, wow, this is great.
Yep.
And the more people should hear about it. And I don't want to do it every time I see a new person. Because for me, that's redundant, even though it's new for them, right? So it's like, oh, why don't I just do a podcast? So I just say all my opinion for once, but then everybody can benefit from it.
Yeah, so, it's a lot of fun. Thank you for doing this. I enjoy listening.
That's why I'm saying, like, maybe you can do something similar, because I would really like to hear about, because today we just briefly went through every single perspective of the topics. But if you have like an hour-long discussion with students on, nuclear and human rights, I would love to hear about it.
I will keep you in the loop. There is something on the burner.
It's really exciting. Well, I guess, yeah, that's a lot today.
We should talk offline about it.
Yeah. Well, let's close this podcast first. Thank you so much for joining us today. And
thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Cool.